This episode mentions rape and may be triggering for some listeners. Hey everybody, Jen Hatmaker here, your host of the For the Love podcast. Welcome to the show. Oh man, today, you guys. We're about to wrap up our Matriarchy series, and I have been so grateful for our guests and the topics that have come up as we have been discussing on here what it means to build like a strong and robust and generous, independent, good for everyone matriarchy in our world today, which often looks like pushing back against the patriarchal rule that's been in place for so long and still is. And in a ton of ways, of course, it feels like we've come leaps and bounds in some areas of equality, and there are things to celebrate for sure. But then often something happens and we are snapped back into reality that there is still a fight in regards to, well, who is in control of us as women, who's in control of our bodies, our opportunities, our voices, our choices. This patriarchal attitude has prevailed to convince women really forever, but certainly in recent history, especially in the area of sexual consent, that women are to be held responsible for non-consensual experiences, sometimes simply because they ended up alone with a man. And women were taught, if a man had power and respect and they assaulted or violated you, the only way to not bring shame upon herself was just to keep it a secret, right? And we know how this goes in the public eye. The man's version is often considered the truth, and the women's version was considered hysterical or beyond repair. This quote from NPR correspondent Jana Smith writing about this, said, "Women today are militantly fed up with the premise that the shame of non-consensual sexual encounters is still so disproportionately theirs to bear." I don't have to tell anybody that women have classically been held responsible for the bad behavior of men. So, guys, our guest this week has been a fairly recent voice who said loudly, clearly, and on a global stage, this is not okay. And there was never a time it was okay. And was brave enough to come forward at high personal cost. We have Christine Blasey Ford today, you guys. Of course, you remember that Christine testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on September 27th, 2018, while it was considering the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the United States Supreme Court. And she described an alleged sexual assault by the Supreme Court nominee that took place at a high school party in the 80s. I remember every bit of this, every minute. We were all watching, holding our breath. So years later now, a few years later, she has written a book. It just came out. It's called One Way Back. And she decided to tell her own story in her own words and on her own terms. And it's all in there. She recounts the months that she spent trying to get information into the right hands without exposing herself and her family to the dangerous backlash they then experienced, and how ultimately she decided to take the stand. Christine Blasey Ford is a research psychologist. She's a professor. She's a devotee of surfing. In fact, she leans pretty heavily on the sport as a metaphor, not just for the whole ordeal, but also for her book. So if you don't remember, or it's in the fog of those years, in her testimony, Christine Blasey Ford accused Kavanaugh of being drunk at a party when she was 15 and he was 17, and that she experienced sexual assault. And when she said at the confirmation hearing that testifying terrified her, she had reason to be terrified. The death threats against her and her children forced her family to hide out in hotels and other places with literally a 24-hour security detail. And she still needs security in 2024. So the story behind the headlines is actually a very complex memoir of a woman and a mother and a scientist and an unlikely whistleblower. Her experience shows that a single voice coming forward to shine a light on an imbalance of power actually provides a platform for so many other voices in what she hopefully terms as a ripple that might one day become a wave. It was an honor to speak to her today, and I respect her and admire her so much. And I think this conversation is going to be so enlightening for you. So please enjoy this candid conversation with the courageous Christine Blasey Ford. Christine, I have been so looking forward to this conversation. I mean, obviously, count me among the millions who watched every minute in 2018. And that was my, of course, introduction to you, as it was for most of us. And it was with bated breath that we all watched your testimony unfold. And as women, progressive women particularly, that's the kind of community, I lead a community sort of like that. It was both inspiring and devastating. And so I would love to go back to that time frame, if you don't mind, for a few minutes. And I'm trying to imagine what it must have been like for you in the privacy of your family, inside your own head, in your personal community, when you realized that Brett Kavanaugh was a nominee and you knew what you knew. That it now it seems clear because we've watched it play out. This is what you did. These are the choices you made. This was your testimony. This was the thing. But at the time, I'd love to hear what that decision was like for you, how you decided to move forward with your story, really having no idea what it was going to produce.
Right. I had no idea how it was going to unfold. And the first week of July, when there was still a list of possible candidates to be nominated, he was on that list. And when I saw that he was on that list, I just automatically, I don't know why it was so automatic, but it was very automatic to me that I would need to say something. But it wasn't automatic to me that I was going to end up on television or that lots of people would know about this. It was just automatic to me that I was going to have to talk with my representative or someone to let them know that this was not a candidate that I felt was that maybe the other people on the list should be looked at a little bit further. So,
what were your closest people and your advisors telling you?
Well, I didn't have advisors at that time. I was at the beach in Santa Cruz at a junior lifeguard camp with my kids. And so I had the other parents. So I had other parents and we were sitting in our beach tents talking about what should I do? And the first thing we did was recap everything bad I had ever done in my life. And did I even have a right to say something? And so we had a lot of conversations about, for maybe 2 straight days, all day, about, do I really have the right to say anything? I'm not a perfect person. And is it okay? Is it okay to weigh in on this? And I felt that, and so did my friends, that I definitely had to say something. it was just a matter of we didn't know how, and we were wondering, how do people do that other than through the
Right.
media? I didn't want to go.
Right.
Ironically, I didn't
Where's
want
the
to.
handbook? I'd like to be a whistleblower for a Supreme Court nominee. Where's
Yeah.
where's the rules? Yes.
Yeah. And I was looking for something other than the media. And because I was afraid to go on TV, ironically. And so, or to be in the news, or just to have any of that level of focus. So I figured I would speak with our representative to Congress, and that she could perhaps advise me what the next steps would be um, in that process, so that ultimately that the Senate could know, since their role is to advise on that choice. So
Mhm. So is
I
that
was
what you
hoping.
did? You reached out to her first?
I did. I reached out to her when there was still a short list of candidates, because I felt like once the decision was made about whoever the nominee was going to be, that it wouldn't be then fair to say anything. It seemed really important to say something before he was chosen as the nominee, which was in July. So I reached out to my representative, and I left an anonymous tip on the Washington Post tip line. So there would be some other record of this. Um, and that was on July 6th that I did
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
How did this escalate from a pretty quiet, pretty private call or email to one person who would then be expected to sort of be your proxy, um, to what we know it became?
So it was kind of an all day, everyday process that summer of talking it over with friends about how I would proceed, and then eventually obtaining legal counsel and meeting with them for most of the month of August, every day, and talking about what the options were, and how would I approach the committee, what kind of letter might I write them, and deliberating back and forth, drafting possible letters, just doing a lot of work. It was really a busy, busy time of spending most of the day, every day, trying to figure out the best way forward that would be where the information could be shared, but that I'd also be
Hmm.
somewhat protected.
I'd love to hear you talk more about that, because I'm assuming it was becoming increasingly clear that you weren't going to be able to tell this story from the shadows or from the privacy of your own real life, that in some way, shape, or form, you were going to have to be front and center. Um, is this what everybody was saying to you? Were you trying to maintain your own sense of distance from it, or did it become clear that month, that August? Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to testify.
It became clear because at some point, well, first of all, we decided that I was not going to come forward after the council reviewed the letters, the draft letters to the committee, and his and Brett's initial hearings were coming up right around Labor Day, and we decided we're not going to do this. And it was a very difficult decision. I did not come to that decision lightly, but the council advised that it really was not possible for me to weigh in without the train going where the train is already going, and you can't go and stand in front of the train. So it's a very difficult Labor Day weekend, sort of accepting that after the whole summer of doing nothing but thinking about this and wrangling with it.
So to be
And
clear, what they were saying was, it really doesn't matter what you say. This is going to happen. He's going to be confirmed. Nothing you say is going to matter. So let's just lessen the collateral damage here.
yes, and they felt as bad about that as I did. It was we had been really working hard on it, and they just in the end felt like it was best for me as their client to protect me from from what might happen. And I, of course, couldn't really imagine how bad that could be. I thought that I could handle that. And I thought, how bad could it be? Just people maybe some people speaking poorly about me, or it was very abstract, whatever the idea of what bad could happen to me. So, and then my name was leaked. So during Brett's initial hearings, people started showing up at my house and calling, and clearly people had figured out who I was. And at that point, my lawyers advised that I go ahead and get in front of it and go and meet with the media and do a story with a reporter that the reporter that I had initially talked to 2 or 3 months earlier when I had left the tip for the Washington Post. So I went ahead and met with her, and then came out through that story. Maybe 10 days before I testified, that story came out in the Washington Post, and that was the end of my previous life. So.
Yes, absolutely. Even then, were you expecting that simply to just sort of be on record? You would get to control your own narrative by, selecting a journalist to work with. You'd put it out there, and then people can make their own decisions. Did you still know that there was going to be a link to testifying?
No, I didn't know that I was going to testify for another week or so, right up until the very last few days. I think I testified, I flew out on the 25th of September, and I decided maybe on the 22nd or 23rd that I was willing to go to DC to meet with the senators, but not necessarily testify publicly. I was still deciding all the way up until the final day.
So that's how that works. You're not subpoenaed. This is just of your own volition at all the way to the end.
Yes. And there was a sense that maybe they didn't really want me to testify. And so it was definitely not a subpoena situation. It was of my own volition, and it was a big decision to make. And once I got to DC, that seemed like the hardest part, was just getting there. And then once I got there and we met with the attorneys and people who prepare you for what can happen in these hearings, and we spent the day together beforehand, and I wrote a draft statement, and then I was ready to go for the next day. But it was quite scary.
It's terrifying. It was terrifying to watch. We all were just flattened in our chairs. I don't think I breathed. I don't think I moved. It was so overwhelming, so intimidating. I should have been prepared. I wasn't prepared for the hostility, the aggression, and your strength of character in the middle of it was extraordinary. I'd love to hear from you, if it isn't just a foggy blur, how you were feeling and what you were thinking. What happened that you weren't expecting? What did your team prepare you enough for the questions that were coming, and the accusations and the fury, and how much of that took you by shock?
So we had no way of knowing what the questions would be. And so unlike other hearings we might see where people are testifying about a particular subject or a case, we didn't really know what they would ask. And the format was that everyone had 5 minutes to ask a question. So each person had their allotted 5 minutes. So it just became a matter of, it actually wasn't as difficult as some other parts of this process, because it just became like a job interview where this person's going to talk to you for 5 minutes, and you just have to survive every 5-minute chunk of that. And then the next person's turn, the next person's turn. So, and at that point, I was very locked in. I didn't really have a lot of awareness of how I was thinking or feeling. I was so focused and staring up at that seal of the United States and just really trying to do my best. And it was a lot, but it was not the most difficult part. And I got some really good advice from my counsel, including ignore every time they speak to each other. Every time they speak to each other, that's your break. That is your break. Yeah. And then that's like you take a breath and you don't listen to that, because that has nothing to, because the way it was put to me is that doesn't have anything to do with you. So it was really good to have those breaks and not be super tuned in like I might be at a work faculty meeting or something. I wasn't having to track what they were saying to each other. So all in all, I have to say it was very difficult, but wasn't the worst part.
Let's talk about the worst part, because nobody could have prepared you for what came after. Not probably in your outermost imagination. You obviously you're thinking mean words, maybe mean words. Mean words. None of us like it, but we can weather it. But it's so far beyond mean words, what you then sort of stepped into. Can you talk a little bit about what, as you said, life changed and what it looked like from that point on for you?
Yes. So beginning with the Washington Post article 10 days before the testimony, I moved out of the house for one night and I brought 8 pieces of clothing and thought I would be gone for a couple of days and that we would just stay in a hotel. And there were too many people parked out in front of our house. And that was just basically a privacy issue where there's so much media watching us that we just needed to go to a hotel for one night. But that one night turned into 3 hotels and then another house to live in, and we were gone until Christmas. So yeah, so we took on physical security detail, and the kids were taken to school with security guards, and I stayed in the house or in the hotel. Sometimes we had to change hotels if people figured out where we were. And I was receiving all kinds of death threats, which is now something that a lot of people are experiencing as well. And but at the time, it was just really quite scary, and it remains a little bit scary to this day.
Yeah, that's not normal. That's not normal. That's not normal. We just don't receive death threats while we live in a hotel. This is out of bounds. I mean, you couldn't even go anywhere, right? You can't go to Target. Like you were like in a prison.
Yeah, I had no desire to go anywhere and I couldn't go anywhere. And so I stayed in the hotels. That way the kids that was my priority, that they wouldn't have to drop out of school or miss part of the school year, and that they could continue doing most of their activities and get to their activities safely and have people watching out for them. So fortunately, the community was really supportive and helped. Everybody had their eyes on them and would send me photos of the things that they were doing and the sports games and all the things that they participate in, and the back to school nights and the school meetings and everything. People shared with me all of that information so that I would stay in the loop and know what was going on.
I'm so glad to hear that. I'm so glad to hear that your community just went, all right, these are our kids. We need to circle the wagons. That is a teeny little encouraging piece in that sort of melee that you were having to experience, that the community said, we're just not going to let this happen to these kids. That's meaningful.
It was quite lovely. It was really it wasn't even necessarily people who I knew, but people who I didn't know would let me know that they signed my kids up for something that they needed to be signed up for. And just everybody did what they could. Everybody pitched in, it seemed.
So I am so impressed, and I respect that here, 5 years later, 6 years later, you have decided to put this on record. And in your words and on your terms, nobody on earth would blame you if you wanted this in your rearview mirror for the rest of your life. No one, no one, no one could find fault if your choice was, we are going to attempt to live our lives in peace, and in safety, and I've done my part, because you did your part. You said the truth. You went on record. You did the right thing, but you have chosen to write your story, to put this in a book, to come out all these years later. And I respect it so much. And I'd love to hear, first of all, you talk about your decision to write your own story.
Well, it has changed over time. So in the immediate aftermath, there were so many things I couldn't believe were happening. And I felt that information at some point needed to be shared so that anyone else going through this type of situation would have something to compare to and something to relate to and to understand, and make all of those abstract concerns someone might have about coming forward more concrete, and what that really looks like when you experience retaliation for speaking up. So the first version of the book was something I worked on in the first year, and thank goodness I didn't put that book out. That wasn't a very nice book. That was
You were kind of still writing that from the wound. Like, you're still bleeding out a little bit when those words went down on a page. Yeah.
Yes. And there were so many side stories in the news, and I was getting really caught up in a lot of those side stories. And so it took many years to feel that I was ready to say something and to break the silence. I had been silent for so long. I was feeling a little bit guilty even for having so much focus and learning so much about how the contributions of so many other women in so many different venues have spoken up against sexual harassment and sexual assault. And I thought I had not done enough. I really thought I need to share all the things that I didn't know beforehand. Maybe I can share them, and maybe it will help someone.
I admire this in you, that said there's more to say. Obviously, I mentioned at the top of this interview that I watched your segment on CBS Sunday Morning, which was powerfully done. Well done. But my favorite part, I went back and looked at it this morning, before I hopped on with you, was the portion of the segment when the cameras came into your dining room, and it is covered, top to bottom, every surface, all the shelves, boxes and boxes and boxes of letters. And people have written you more. I think you said 30,000 letters. Is that the number that you said? Some outrageous thing.
There's more. That's how many we've read so far.
Oh, that's how many you've read.
A lot. Yeah, we're still at it. There's a lot more than that to go, but that's how much we've read so far from all 50 states and 42 countries. Just
women, but also men. Sexual abuse goes a lot of directions. And you said in that piece that you wrote the book for the letter writers. I could cry just saying it. I love women. I serve women. I could just cry. It's the letter writers that we work for. And so that was such a powerful thing to say. And I understand that you decided to put this right back out into the spotlight for them,
Thank you. They did so much for me, and they don't even know me, and they sent so much love. And people would say to me, you don't need to write them back. And I said, well, maybe you should read a couple of the letters. And so anyone who has read even one or two of the letters says, oh, I get it. I get why you feel the need to respond to them, because they're so generous in their support, and they were such lovely people. And they buoyed me through the process. And I was going through a really difficult few years, really, really difficult times. And they were the ones that kept me going, was knowing that anything that I was experiencing that I thought this is the worst thing someone could ever experience, there were thousands of people who experienced a very similar thing.
That's right. And there was something powerful about you in front of that microphone at that hearing. And then later in your book, telling your story with a clear voice and in your own authority and power over your own body. And it's like you were standing in as proxy for millions of abuse victims, of exploitation victims, of assault victims. And there was like a collective power in it, that you were speaking for you, but you were speaking for a lot of people, for a lot of women, for a lot of abuse victims. And so I was moved to see that this huge groundswell of people wrote to you and said, thank you, me too. Like, me too. And I identify with this, and I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful for you. I think as we wrap it up, because you have now joined a band of women that are notable, that are visible, that have notoriety, who have put their own selves on the line to make sure the world hears a true story, and that there is some form of justice on whatever level. And sometimes it doesn't go to the top like we would hope. But there are levels of justice that you have put your hand to, that means a lot to women. And so I think I'd like to hear you speak right now about how you see yourself in this community of voices. You had a choice and you made it. And how this matters, not just to victims of sexual abuse in any way, but also what's going on in our country right now as we are losing our grip on autonomy over our own bodies, over our own rights, over our medical care, over our futures, because all these threads are bound together. And so I know you're not a pundit, you're not a congresswoman, but you are deep in the belly of this beast. And so maybe just some words from you on why this all matters.
So I first want to just honor all the people like you and others who work on this all the time and have dedicated their careers to this and have done so much work. And I did one thing, and yes, it was a big thing, but there are people who work on this all the time, and I really every day just growing more and more knowledgeable and respectful and feeling empowered by learning about people. And in the current milieu that we're in, I think that the letter writers are symbolic of how much we really all do love each other in reality, in the real world, and how the system can often work in ways that makes us feel divided and makes us feel negatively towards each other. But when we actually connect, we're really powerful together, and that we need to keep going with that we need to stay connected to each other and remember that in real life, if we met people and talked to them, we would care for them, and that there are people out there that are perfect strangers. That's another reminder from the letter writers. There are perfect strangers that really care about us, and there are people out there that we really care about that we don't know either, that we have love for, and that just to I'm constantly reminded of that and thinking about that, and just thinking that we all need to stay connected.
Lovely. I share the same hope for our culture, for our community, specifically for the community of women, and without ever losing sight that we are super powerful together, very much so. And I'm grateful to you for choosing the sacrifices that you have in order to continue to shine light into places where women have been subjugated and abused and silenced and ignored and disbelieved. This matters. It matters. It's a link in a chain that we're building together. And you've done your link. You clicked your link in, and thank you. That's right. You've done it, and it's a marvel. One Way Back just came out, and my readers are going, or my listeners are going to be readers. So where would you like to send this community if they'd like to read more, see more, hear more, find out more about your story?
Well, I think the book is a good place to start, and it outlines how I came forward, and it outlines the aftermath and what it's like to go through something like this and to try to navigate and try to build a new life afterward, and what that can look like, and how that can be done, and that's always a possibility, and sounds super scary, but it's also an opportunity. And so I've found it to be a wonderful opportunity to build a life in the way that I want it to be, and make intentional choices about that. So
Beautiful.
I hope that people will
And
enjoy
it's
it.
everywhere. It's everywhere books are sold. One Way Back. And powerful. It's just powerful. It's a powerful word in a sentence that we're all speaking. And so thank you. My agent told me I'm doing some writing right now that's challenging and hard and goes to some hard places. And she told me, of course, one thing that the readers don't necessarily know, or I didn't touch on it, is that you've structured the book around a lot of surfing metaphors, which is a big part of your life. And I remember she told me before I'd written one word, and I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can write this one. And she just said, Jen, save nothing for the swim home. And I was like, oh God, that's how far out we're going to have to paddle. And you've done it. You went out. You went out. You saved nothing
And you
for the
can
swim home.
too.
That's right.
I'm
We
glad
can.
that you're going to paddle out also.
That's right. Thank you for being on the show today. I am so honored to have met you, and proud of you, and grateful for you, and just cheering you on in this next phase of your life and for your family. And I sincerely hope that this next decade has a lot of peace and joy in it.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, you guys. Whew. Yeah. I am tickled that she kept saying, I've just done a small part. I'm like, no, ma'am. No, ma'am. Not small, not quiet, not minor. She did her part. I will link to everything related here. If you go over to jenhatmaker.com under the podcast tab, I'll have this episode, I'll have the show notes, I'll have links to Christine's book if you'd like to hear more. And I just want to send love to everyone listening today who has ever stood anywhere near these shoes, telling your own truth, using your own voice, banging your own drum, calling out an abuser, calling out someone who traumatized you in any way or assaulted you in any way. That's your link. And it matters. It matters. And your story matters and your voice matters and the truth matters. And so, again, to Christine's final point, gosh, we're powerful together. Let's stay connected to one another and encourage truth telling, bolster one another when the backlash comes, and it will. Knowing that our voices together are so powerful. I'm grateful to Christine for being on the show today and for all my guests in this amazing series on the matriarchy. I hope you have loved it as much as I have. And if you've missed any episodes, go back and catch them because every single one of them is fire. All right, you guys, we sure love you here at the podcast, and we'll see you next week.